Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today we have a big show. There's been a lot of baseball news today we're going to go over. There was an attempted coup in the MLBPA. We're going to talk about big pitcher. Blake Snell is off the market. Reigning NL Cy Young winner. We're also going to talk a little bit of football. The Jets made a big move. We're going to talk about their offseason revamped offensive line. They just brought in Mike Williams. And we are going to also talk about the Steelers quarterback room a little bit with the battle between Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, who I think should start, and what that's going to look like in the season. But before we get into it, remember, if you'd like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message. It'll pop up on the bottom of the screen. It'll be there for a little bit. We'll have a little discussion about what you have to say. We appreciate anything that you do give. Again, that link to leave a tip or donation is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, let's just get right into the big news of the day, and that is Blake Snell is officially off of the market. The reigning NL Cy Young winner, the two-time Cy Young winner, has signed a deal with the Giants. It's a 2-year, $62 million deal with an opt-out after year one. So this could be a 1-year or a 2-year deal. $31 million a year, signs with the Giants, adds to an already pretty stacked rotation. The Giants, a team that has to compete with the Dodgers and I guess the Padres in their division, if the Padres can ever figure their stuff out. Blake Snell signing with them is big for them. They've had a very interesting offseason. You know, they parted ways with J.D. Davis. They brought in 2 of the 4 Boris clients that had been out on the market forever. Now, there still is Jordan Montgomery out there, and they've brought in Matt Chapman on 3-year, $54 million deal. So a relatively cheap deal for him, and now a 2-year, $62 million deal for Blake Snell. So they got 2 of the Boris guys in their camp. And that should absolutely help them out, put them in playoff contention. They're a team that's always kind of been on that borderline, the San Francisco Giants, especially since a lot of their core left. You know, that 2010, 2012, 2014, 3 World Series in 6 years teams. A lot of their core is gone. Buster Posey retired a couple seasons ago after having a really resurgent year. So they've kind of been mediocre since then. So this is a very big signing for them. They've always had very good pitchers, and they continue to have that. It's been a very good offseason for them. Obviously, the season is right around the corner. We're just about 2 weeks out now, and we'll get more MLB coverage as we get closer to that. But Blake Snell signing with the Giants, and this is more of a interesting thing with Scott Boras, because he is probably the biggest agent in all of baseball. You know, there's not many agents you know the names of. Scott Boras is one of them. He's one of the more powerful forces in baseball negotiations. He has the contracts of so many big stars. You know, you talk about obviously the big 4: Cody Bellinger, Blake Snell, Matt Chapman, and Jordan Montgomery that's still out there. He's working with Juan Soto as well. Scott Boras has his claws in almost every single major player in the MLB nowadays. So we take a look at the power that he has and the kind of disappointing offseason that he's had for his clients. And it's there's a theory that I've heard going around a couple places that the MLB owners are trying to cut down on his power. The MLB owners are trying to loosen his grip on the MLB, stop his death grip on the market, his crazy asking prices, which he has been known to ask for a lot of money. You know, you look at the 4 guys. Again, that's been the main story this offseason. He was asking for a 9-year deal for Blake Snell, over $200 million. I believe he was asking for 9 years, $275. He ends up getting 2 years, $61. The same thing with Matt Chapman. He had a $100 million deal that he turned down to go to free agency, and now he's making $54. Cody Bellinger's in a little bit of a different situation, and so is Jordan Montgomery. But you see this move that he's been doing a lot where he has his players hit free agency so he can compete in the open market. The open market is always going to get you more money, or theoretically, it's going to get you more money because you can have people fight over you. Go to the highest bidder instead of just going to one bidder. Generally, one of those is going to be a little more lucrative for you. But taking a look at, taking a look at what he's done this offseason, it's a very big dichotomy from the rest of it. And spending in general went down this offseason. And that's not because it was a small free agent pool. I mean, you had Shohei Ohtani out there, for God's sake. He got, I believe there was $1 billion less spent this offseason so far. There's obviously still a couple guys out there, but $1 billion less have been spent this offseason. I believe it was like 3 point something billion dollars last year, and now it's just 2 point something this year. So a whole $1 billion less has been spent, and $1 billion of those dollars that were spent, so half of that money, was spent on two of the guys that the Dodgers brought in. Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Shohei Ohtani. Those two guys right there were $1.025 billion. So they basically had half of the market right there. And the rest of the market only got $1 billion. That's a lot of players to only make $1 billion when you're handing out contracts this big. This Blake Snell contract is basically a tenth of the total free agent market that's been out there. It's not quite a tenth, but you take a look at the amount of players that are still getting signed, and the big names that waited out there so long, and you start to think, are these MLB owners trying to blackball's not the right word, get some power back from Scott Boras, because the owners in the MLB especially, since there's no salary cap or salary floor, have a very interesting relationship with player contracts and player money. It's done very differently than any other sport, in any other major American sport. It's tough to compare it to sports like football, because in baseball all these contracts are fully guaranteed, and there's also no salary cap floor, no salary cap ceiling. There's just the luxury tax. So you see teams like the Dodgers go out, and spend $1 billion on two guys. And then you see teams like the A's spend a total of $38 million on their entire roster. There's instances of single players on single teams getting paid more than entire rosters. And it's the dichotomy between big markets and small markets that's just so big in the MLB. And some of it might be because the special relationship that baseball has with its local TV markets. I know here in Virginia, the Nationals local TV provider just moved up in most cable packages, which is a big deal, for a lot of people, because now you can't watch your baseball, especially with blackout dates. That is something that really bugs me. And we're getting a little off topic here, but the blackout dates, and I understand why they do it, because they have these local games and they have these local markets. But if you're going to continue to move these local games, these at least local channels, into higher and higher channel packages, you can't continue to have these blackout dates. It really bugs me, because I pay for MLB TV every year. I pay for all these sports streaming services so that I can watch all this stuff and talk to you guys about this, because they're not always on TV. I pay for all this stuff. And when I want to watch my hometown team, I want to turn on the Nationals, I can't watch them. They're blacked out every single time. I can't watch my favorite team. If I'm out of the house, I can't watch my favorite team on my phone. I've got an app for this, They have these awesome services, and these blackout markets, oh my goodness, do they piss me off. And I understand it's the whole lucrative thing with, you signed a deal with a local TV channel to be your broadcast partner, so we can't be showing it to the internet, to the national community. But if you're making me pay extra and I can't watch it just because I'm in a geographical region, and especially now that they're making it harder and harder for us to watch those local channels. These local channels are going bankrupt. They need to increase their fees to make enough money because they're just not getting enough. They're not getting that much funding. They're losing their support. It's not that big of a deal. Obviously, you still have those big ones. You still have the Yes Network up in New York, the Nesson up in Boston, but Bally Sports is going down. That has like 15 markets, I believe. They've got so many MLB markets under their umbrella, and that's crashing the MLB market. That's crashing a lot of it. You take a look at these blackout markets, and I really hope this changes. This is one of the biggest thing I hope change in the MLB from a fan perspective, is that you can watch these games, you can watch your favorite team on these apps, these MLB TVs. It's the same thing with the NBA or the NHL or football as well. You get the local games and you can't watch it unless you're not in the local area. So one of those things that really bugs me. But Blake Snell signing with the Giants, he is the second to last big domino to fall. You still have Jordan Montgomery out there on the free agency market. He is the type of guy that really just about any team would love to have on their roster. Jordan Montgomery is a lefty. He had a pretty resurgent season last year with the Rangers. He can slot in pretty much, uh, you know, top end, mid part of your rotation in just about any contending team. The Yankees, especially with Garrett Cole going down, I think would be a great fit for Jordan Montgomery over there. Just keep them afloat for a little while. He's not an ace, Jordan Montgomery, but he will get the job done. He'll keep you in games. He's going to give you quality starts, uh, and he's a hard throwing lefty. So I think there's a lot of teams that should want him. I'm just curious to see how much longer this goes out because opening day is just about 2 weeks away now. We are in the home stretch. Uh, Baseball's right around the corner. It's almost April. But yeah, in our next segment, we're going to finish up baseball. There was an attempted coup in the MLBPA last night. We're going to break that down, talk about everything that's going on with that. Appreciate you guys for tuning in to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Stick around. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows or 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with me through that break. If you are just tuning in, we just talked about Blake Snell, MLB blackout, and Jordan Montgomery, places he might go. In this coming up segment, we are going to continue with baseball. We're going to talk about the attempted coup that happened last night in the MLBPA. Talk about how that came out of nowhere, the effects, why some players are for it, why some players are against it. But before we get too far into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. It'll pop up on the bottom of our screen here. We'll have a little discussion about what you had to say. For me, you, everyone else watching all across the internet to talk about. We appreciate everything you do give. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we're going to talk about the attempted MLB coup. in the MLB Players Association. Late last night, there was a attempt by about 2/3 of the player leaders. For those who are unaware of the way that the MLBPA works, is that all 30 of the MLB teams elect one player representative to be kind of their voice in their voice in the organization. So about 2/3 of those guys, I believe there were 22 of them, collectively in a group text came together and said, "Hey, we want you out. We would like you to not be a part in charge of this anymore." They were talking about the the majority leader, Bruce Mayer. Bruce Mayer, who has been in charge for about 10 years. He just signed a 5-year extension in 2022, and they're asking for him to be replaced by Harry Marino. Harry Marino, a guy who a little younger, I believe he's 29. He's in charge. He was the guy in charge of unionization efforts in the minor leagues, and that was a major story for those who were paying attention just a couple years ago. The uh, the minor league system in the MLB has always been a mess. There's been all these kind of inequities and bad treatment. You know, you had guys that were paying that were staying in one bedroom apartments, renting with like 10 guys on the team just so they could afford a living. You know, they were living paycheck to paycheck, day to day. They were not making a lot of money down there. They were not in good situations. They were not provided housing. They are bust halfway across the country. The minor leagues had for a long time were not a very good place to be. But it was just a part of baseball. And in recent years, we've started to see a movement to start getting better treatment for the minor league players. It kind of started, I guess the movement's been going on for a while, but it kind of really picked up steam around the pandemic. After minor leagues basically got shut down for the entire 2020 season, the uh, MLB started putting stuff in so that they would have to get housing. You know, teams would have to provide a place for them to live so they weren't homeless, basically. They weren't squatting 10 to a room. It's, it's something that you'd think would be basic human decency, you know, something that you'd think would just kind of be done. But it wasn't. And we're glad that changes are made because this is necessary changes. There's always the old heads, and this was an argument that I never understand. And maybe I'm just not old and experienced enough to feel this way, but argument I never understood is I had to go through it, so you have to as well. And that's the kind of argument, that kind of bad faith argument that was surrounding uh, this entire mismanagement of the minors. Not just like the high minors or the low minors. This was all throughout the minors, and every team did it differently. The Dodgers and the Rays, for example, were doing a really, really good job. They were not doing the bare minimum. They were providing housing for their guys. They were providing food. They were giving them basic human decency, basically, allowing them to survive off the salary that they're making at work. But there was a lot of pushback when they were trying to unionize in the minor leagues that was talking about, hey, when I was a player, I had to walk 13 miles to get to the stadium. I got splashed by every single bus that went past me on the rainy puddles. Um, and they just didn't really have the empathy because they wanted the people to suffer just like they did. And to a certain extent, I do understand that. You know, it sucks that you missed the cutoff. You know, oh, it's so cool that. So, for instance, college I'm going to, they're adding a major program for for sports broadcasting. They didn't have that when I started. They're starting it next year. I'm graduating. Ugh, I wish I could do that. I don't wish that people couldn't do that. I just wish that I could have done that. And they're two very different things. And I hate when the argument gets to the fact between I wish I could do it and I couldn't, so now no one gets to do it. And this goes more out of baseball than it has to be, but there was a coup done, and it was along kind of the same lines. There were a lot of guys that flipped the script and were saying, "Hey, this is a good thing he did. I know he's young, but he kind of spearheaded this, and he made a lot of good changes. Him being Harry Marino, the guy that they would like to replace Bruce Mayer with." Uh, um, there were 8 players though that decided they didn't want to make the change, and the reason that they didn't want to make the change is also understandable reasons. You know, there were good reasons on both sides. There were they were saying he's too young and inexperienced. He is only 29. He doesn't have a lot of experience, and they were pointing to the MLB negotiations where he asked for too much and ended up losing some stuff. So he's like, they're saying he's an idealist. He doesn't know when enough is enough. He needs to learn when to take the deal, and he's not experienced enough to know when we just need to take it. The negotiations back in 2022, I believe, were the last ones. The last CBA negotiations. They're saying he went a little too far. They had some stuff secured, and then he pushed them a little more, and he didn't get it. Um, but there's pros and cons to both sides. I'm interested to see what's going to happen because they didn't make a decision. They kind of just had like a Zoom call with all 30 leaders and the president in charge, and they said, "Hey, get this guy out of here. We don't want him anymore." And he said, "Oh, I'll think about it." So they're gonna do their due diligence. It's an interesting story to keep an eye on because, like I was talking a little bit in our last segment, the MLB does things a lot different than any other major sports league, especially with the way they do contracts and stuff. And this kind of move could absolutely change that. It could make it go more towards a salary cap. I know the players really want a salary floor to avoid teams like the A's not paying anyone. You know, not really trying, just trying to make money, paying the minimum that they can. And that's why you see such a disparity between these big markets and these small markets, especially in baseball. That's why Moneyball exists. You guys, I'm sure, have heard of at least the movie Moneyball. That's why that was a thing, because the A's are a small market team, and they didn't have the payroll. You know, there's no salary floor, there's no minimum, there's no salary cap. So these big market teams can just go out and spend, and it makes it harder on these small market teams, which is why when you have a team like the 2014-2015 Royals, you see how fast they implode. Because once that World Series tax hits, those guys are gone. So this is a very interesting story to follow for the future of baseball. It's not too big right now. It could end up being nothing, because nothing has changed as of yet. But you take a look at the future and the way that a lot of sports are heading towards in their directions with negotiations. I mean, you kind of see the beginnings of it in college basketball. They're kind of following more of a baseball approach, and I'm interested, not college basketball, college sports in general, college football especially. They're following more of a baseball approach, and I'm interested to see how that works out for them because we see what it's doing for baseball. Baseball was America's game. It's starting to lose popularity, and because of that, these deals that they have with their local markets are starting to lose value. So they're not as profitable anymore, and there's going to be big changes coming in baseball. And college sports are in the opposite situation. They're getting more popular, and they're not really at risk of losing it right now. But if they keep making some changes the way they've been making some changes, they're going to start to lose popularity again. Or not again, they're going to start to lose popularity. So it's a really interesting place to compare and contrast these different leagues. Obviously, they're completely different. But the MLB, I suspect, and the owners never want to get a salary cap floor because then they have to pay a minimum, and they don't want that. They like it that they can't pay. That's really one of the big things that held up negotiations in the last CBA negotiation. That's why there was almost a huge lockout last time. Eventually, the players gave in and they didn't get that salary cap floor, but there were a whole bunch of things that they did get, so it wasn't a complete loss. Generally, it was a loss for them. Um, the MLBPA kind of got pushed around a little bit, and that's another reason why they kind of want to change this. Although both of these guys were in power at the time, so there's a very interesting situation developing there. I'm gonna keep an eye on this. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this as well. If you think the MLB should get a cap, uh, what do you think the cap should be set at? Obviously, there's some crazy cap calculations. I don't know how these other leagues do it, but it's a lot easier to do it when there's a centralized pool of money. I know there is some kind of centralized pool of money for baseball, but it's not as lucrative as it is for a sport like football or basketball when they have like this big major contract, national contract that baseball does not. Um, but yeah, there's a whole lot of background money stuff to be sorted out with this. I do think that they are going to have a change in judgment. I know they just gave Bruce Meyer, who is the deputy executive director. They just want to replace the assistant director with Harry Marino. So pros and cons. I'm always in favor of the players. When in doubt, we don't know all the information. I always side with the players because they're generally closer to me than I am to an owner. So we're gonna keep an eye out on this, see what develops here. But in our next segment, we're going to transition out of baseball, move into some football. There was some breaking news with the Jets today. Mike Williams signed a 1-year contract with the Jets. We'll talk about their offseason. I really liked what they've done. Wide receiver, offensive line. They've done a lot. It's basically completely new. But we're also going to talk a little bit about the Steelers quarterback room. They brought in Russell Wilson. They brought in Justin Fields. They got rid of Kenny Pickett. Who's going to be the starter there? Who should be the starter there? We'll talk about all that and more coming up in just a bit on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am Jeremy Lapidus. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back, everybody. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about baseball, a whole bunch of stuff. We talked about Blake Snell finally getting off the market, Scott Boris's impact on that, what that might have been. Jordan Montgomery is still out there, some blackout dates, the attempted coup in the MLBPA. We talked about that, the repercussions of all of that. But we're going to transition out of baseball now. We are going to move into some football. We're going to start off talking about the Steelers quarterback room and eventually talk about the Jets because they had a big signing today about 5 minutes before our show went live with Mike Williams. So we're going to talk about the Jets. We're going to talk about the Steelers quarterbacks. But before we get into either of those, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation with a message. It'll pop up on the bottom of our screen here. We'll have a little discussion about what you wanted to say. For me, you, again, everyone else to see. That link is gsmcpodcast.net. We appreciate everything that you do give, and we appreciate you for watching. But like I was saying, we are going to transition into the NFL now, talking with the Steelers. We're going to start with the Steelers because the quarterback battle is really fascinating to me. And I know a lot of people have said the Steelers have already named their starter as Russell Wilson, but I am not convinced about that. I am so much less convinced that the Steelers will do that. I know the Steelers are a team that is trying to compete. They have made the playoffs. They made the playoffs last year. They snuck in. But they're an interesting team. They did this with Kenny Pickett, with Mason Rudolph. Both of those guys are gone now, and you replace them with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, both of whom play very similar but also very different styles of football. Um, you sign Russell Wilson on a 1 year veteran minimum deal, and he comes in presumably to be the starter. He has like a low floor, high ceiling. So he's going to be more likely to just be average, like he was last season. He was average. People think he was bad. That's because they remember him in Seattle. He was great in Seattle. He has lost a step from Seattle to Denver and now to Pittsburgh. He's probably going to be average this year. But you also trade a day 3 pick, a conditional sixth, for Justin Fields, and you just want him to sit. You're not going to sign him to an extension, especially if he sits. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You have two guys on the roster on expiring contracts, and you always want to have a security policy. But both of these guys were starters last year, and they were both kind of average starters, average to bad, but they were both competent NFL starters, I would say. Um, None of whom they're obviously off their team for reasons. They weren't great. Average is the best you could call their seasons, but when you're trying to figure out who's going to start there, it's a very interesting discussion because it's not like either of them is coming in with, relationships in that locker room. They're both coming in from other teams, Denver and from the Bears. And if you invested very similar amounts into them, you had a day 3 pick into Fields and a veteran minimum contract into Russell Wilson. But both of those guys, especially Russell Wilson, I feel like has the personality that if you were to bench him day one, he's not going to play a full season. Uh, he would not be very happy. He could have gone anywhere. He probably could have started in a couple places. And if he's not going to start in Pittsburgh, then I'm curious to see how he reacts. And it's not just going to be a job that's handed to him because the Steelers want to win games. They're going to have a genuine battle. There's not that many genuine battles that actually happen anymore. You know, a lot of times they say it's a battle, but you know who it's going to be. For instance, up in Seattle, and maybe I'm just wrong about this, but they say it's going to be a battle between Sam Howell and Geno Smith. And quite honestly, I just think that's to light a fire under Geno Smith because not only is Geno Smith been better as of late than Sam Howell, but he also has that locker room. That's his locker room. If he gets benched, it's going to split that locker room, especially if they name Sam Howell the starter day one. That locker room is going to be split, and that's the last thing you want. You cannot have a successful season in any sport without having a locker room that's together. That's the most important thing in sports. You need to be together. You need to have one mindset. You need to be able to work together. And if a locker room is split, you're not going to be able to work together. So that one to me doesn't scream a real quarterback battle, although they are claiming it is a quarterback battle. This one in Pittsburgh, though, this one is a real quarterback battle. This one is a true 50-50. Do you want to trot out that young guy? Do you want to figure out if he is that franchise guy? It's not looking too good for him, and especially if he doesn't start this year, I think he's out of the league. He's never going to start again if he doesn't start this year. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Steelers to trade for him and then just watch him wither away as a backup forever. Russell Wilson, on the other hand, we already know what he is. He's on the back end of his career. He is past his prime. He's only going to get worse from here. And for a team like the Steelers that, you have that security blanket, but you also have a great defense. You have a team that made the playoffs with Mason Rudolph and Kenny Pickett last season. This is a team that is good enough to make the playoffs with either of these quarterbacks, most likely. So are you really going to sit by and watch as you let a young guy like Justin Fields kind of ride out the rest of his career on a bench? Or are you going to give him a shot? Because it doesn't make sense for me to trade for him if you're not going to give him a shot. I know Russell Wilson probably is a better quarterback than he is. But you're not going to learn anything by starting Russell Wilson. And you invested a little bit more, honestly, into Justin Fields than you did into Russell Wilson. So I'm really, really curious to see, how the Steelers handle this, because it's a very, very, very delicate situation, I would say. it could really blow up in their face. It's a very delicate situation there in Pittsburgh. But it's also, I also want to see how the players themselves react, because I think that's going to be even more important. Um, who's going to rise up in that pressure? Who's going to step up, make that change that they need to, and compete? Is that competition what Justin Fields needs? Because he never really was, you know, in competition with the Bears. He was that guy. He always was going to be that guy. Um, so I'm curious to see how this goes. If I were the Steelers, I would start Justin Fields week 1. Give him a couple games, see what you have with him. You know, you have to be able to make that distinction, and you're not going to be able to make that distinction of whether or not he's a good quarterback by him not playing. Russell Wilson, if you really feel like things are going bad, you can toss him in, and he's going to do what he does. He's going to be fine. He's going to do his job. He'll be okay. But you're not going to learn anything by him starting. So if I'm the Steelers, I'm starting Justin Fields day 1. Obviously, it's going to be a battle, and they're going to play the best guy because they want to compete in a tough division, a division with the Ravens, a division with the Bengals, a division with the Browns, a division that had 3 teams in the playoffs last year, and one of those teams was not the Bengals. Now that they're getting Joe Burrow back, they're going to be much better. That is a very, very, very tough division. The AFC North always has been. And now you have 4 playoff potential teams in that division. It's going to be a bloodbath in there. I don't expect any of them to really make it too far because they're gonna beat each other up too much. They're gonna. I mean, you saw it. I know the Ravens made it to the Chiefs, but they were real beat up. They were not. They did not come out in full force against the Chiefs in the playoffs. That AFC North is brutal. Ravens, Chiefs. It's also such a physical division. You know, the Browns and the Steelers and the Ravens all had elite defenses last season. So I'm very, very excited for this division this season. And I'm very curious about how the Steelers handle it because I think that is going to be probably the biggest X factor in that division. We know that the Ravens are going to be good. They lost a lot this offseason, but they still have Lamar Jackson, and they have Derrick Henry, and they have Mark Andrews, and they have Rashad Bateman, and a whole bunch of weapons. Zay Flowers as well. That offensive line is still fine. They did lose a couple pieces. We'll talk about that actually coming up next because they traded one of those pieces to the Jets, and that defense is still very well put together. They did lose Patrick Queen, but they kept Justin Madubuike, who was kind of the center of that defense. They need to fill up linebackers in the draft. That's what I expect them to target, linebackers or offensive line. But they're still very good. They're still very talented. They were the 1 seed last year. The Steelers, we've been talking about them. They made the playoffs with bad quarterback play and a great defense. They have Mike Tomlin, and as long as they're there, they're going to compete to win. You know, he's never had a losing season, blah, blah, blah. Everybody knows that. He's never had a losing season in his entire tenure, and it doesn't seem like he intends to start now, especially on a contract year for him. Do the Steelers bring him back if he only goes 9-8? I don't know if they do. But that'd be very fascinating to see. And that's a whole nother topic for mid-season football. The Bengals are getting Joe Burrow back. They're still shopping T. Higgins. That's going to be a big loss for them, but they still have Jamar Chase. They still have that elite defense in the back. Trey Hendrickson up front. You know, it's a very, very underrated defense there in Cincinnati. And then the Browns. They made the playoffs with Depoy, Myles Garrett, and starting 4 quarterbacks. Joe Flacco took them into the playoffs as one of the hottest teams at the end of the season. That is going to be a bloodbath of a division, and I'm so excited for it. The AFC North is all the way back. The AFC North always has some of the best rivalries in the NFL. You know, you think of the old-fashioned Ravens-Steelers rivalry with Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu. Those were always fun. Hard-hitting games. Defenses really showed out. It was brutal. And I feel like that's happening again in the AFC North. We love that kind of football. At least I do. But anyway, coming up in our final segment, we are going to talk about the Jets. The Jets revamped their entire team. Their entire offensive line is fixed. I mean, changed. not fixed. They basically swapped out the entire O-line for a new one. So we'll break that down. They also took in Mike Williams today to run opposite Garrett Wilson, another weapon for Aaron Rodgers. We're going to go over all of that, their outlook on the season, and more coming up in our next segment on Sports by GSMC. It's on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am Jeremy Lapidus. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with me through that break. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the Steelers, the AFC North, and their quarterback situation. Before that, we were talking some baseball. There was an attempted coup in the MLBPA. We talked all about that. We talked about Blake Snell getting signed to the San Francisco Giants on a 2-year, $62 million deal with opt-outs after year one, what that means for the league, and what kind of implications it has been showing with Scott Boras and the entire MLB. But to finish off our show, we are going to be talking about the New York Jets. They have completely revamped their offensive line. Just today, right before our show went live, they signed Mike Williams to a 1-year, $15 million deal to be opposite of Garrett Wilson, another weapon for Aaron Rodgers in his comeback season. But before we get into the Jets, remember, if you'd like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message. It'll pop up on the bottom of the screen there. We'll have a little discussion between you, me, and everybody else that's watching. Appreciate anything that you do give. Again, one more time, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a comment if you have anything you'd like to add to the show. I'm keeping an eye on all of that as well. But like I was saying, we are going to talk about the new look Jets, especially the offensive line, because that was their big issue this last season. Aside from obviously the quarterback injury and having to start Zach Wilson for most of the season, they had maybe the worst offensive line in all of football. And what have they done this offseason? They got a future Hall of Famer who is still playing at an all-pro level, in Tyron Smith. And then they went out and they traded for Morgan Moses, also a really, really good tackle from the Ravens. They went out and signed John Simpson, a guard. So 3 out of the 5 positions are new. Elijah Vera Tucker is still there, and Joe Tippmann is still the center. So 3 out of 5 of the new Jets offensive line came from other teams, and they're big upgrades, huge upgrades. They need to protect Aaron Rodgers. He is almost 40 years old, coming off an Achilles injury. So that's a huge move for them. And then the other big move for them today, Mike Williams. Obviously, he got cut from the Chargers for cap reasons. He has signed a 1-year deal with the Jets opposite of Garrett Wilson, and I think that is a perfect fit for him. I think the Jets with Aaron Rodgers are a great fit for him because he is that prototypical run past you, big wide receiver. He's going to get those jump balls. He's going to win those 50-50 balls. Aaron Rodgers is a great 50-50 ball thrower, especially when he trusts you. He's going to trust you to go up and make those catches, and Mike Williams can go up and make those catches down the sidelines. He did that all the time for the Chargers, Justin Herbert, and Phillip Rivers earlier in his career. It's This Jets offense is going to be really good. You have a healthy Breece Hall. You have a healthy Aaron Rodgers. You have a healthy Garrett Wilson. Mike Williams. You still are kind of lacking at wide receiver 3, but that's not a huge deal right now. From the depth charts I'm looking at, it looks like it's going to be Allen Lazard there. Tyler Conklin is a really solid tight end, and we just ran through the offensive line. It is a really fun team. They obviously, a lot of this depends on health because a lot of these guys are older. A lot of these guys are injury prone. So you take a look at take a look at this team on paper, and it looks a lot better than it probably will be. But having that on paper look, especially for a team like the Jets that were so atrocious last season after Aaron Rodgers went down, is huge. You have they kind of fixed their backup situation too. They went out and they got Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor is probably an elite backup quarterback. Elite and backup quarterback aren't two words that generally go together in a sentence. But Tyrod Taylor is absolutely one of those guys. You plug and play him in any situation. He played pretty solid for an abysmal New York Giants team last season. And he was really good in Buffalo, the Chargers, the Browns. He's played well everywhere he goes. Houston. It's he's probably the perfect backup. That's his role. He's accepted it. He knows what he's doing. He's not coming for anybody's spot. No one's starting Tyrod Taylor over their guy, unless it's Tommy DeVito or Daniel Jones. But the Jets really have had a really solid offseason, and they have their pick in the first round for the draft. They can go out and they can get a nice piece on defense to shore it up. I know that defense was also really good last season. They have some great corners, but it's crucial for them to finish off this strong because their offense is looking good. They fixed their biggest weakness in the offensive line, and they can be really, really good this season. We talked about their division. Obviously, they had the high-flying offense of the Dolphins to go against them, and then they had with Tua and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and the blazing fast speed of the Dolphins with A-Chain and Mostert as well. And the Bills, obviously, they've had an awful offseason. They had to cut everybody to stay below the cap because Josh Allen's contract kicked in. But it's another tough division, that AFC East. And it's tough in another way. This is more of those high-flying, explosive offenses rather than these hard-hitting, hard-nosed, you're not getting past us defenses like the AFC North is. The AFC East is just a shootout. You've got to keep pace. And the Patriots aren't there. They're not in this conversation. But having 3 of those teams that can do that, theoretically, is going to make for some fun football. So I'm very excited to see exactly how the season plays out for the Jets in that division. I'm not sure it's enough for them to win this division because the rest of the teams in that division are so good. But I do think that they might be competing for a wild card. Those AFC wild card spots are going to be so tough. We just went through. There's 4 teams in the AFC North that could make the playoffs. There's 3 teams in the AFC East that can make the playoffs. At least 2 of those teams are not going to make the playoffs. And then there's other divisions that could have 2 bids as well. The AFC South with the Jaguars and the Texans and the Colts. There's 2, maybe 3 of those teams that can compete for the wild card. That's the AFC is going to be brutal. And then the Chiefs and the Chargers. The Chiefs are going to run away with that division. The Chargers, I like them, but that's because I love Justin Herbert. I don't think they're quite the level of the rest of those teams that I've just rattled off. But, you just go through a list in the AFC, there's like 13 potential playoff teams, maybe less, maybe 12. I don't remember how many I just named. But a good majority of those teams are potential playoff teams. You could see it. If someone said they were the 7th seed, would you really be surprised if about 12 of the AFC teams were the 7th seed this year? It's going to be a battle to get into the playoffs, and I'm so excited for the AFC. The NFC is a little bit of a different story. They're very top heavy, but the AFC, whew, they are very balanced. There's teams all over the place that could go off, win the division, be the 1 seed. The AFC is super unpredictable. So, very excited for that. Tomorrow in our next show, we are going to do some March Madness preview because March Madness starts on Thursday, guys. It is March. The madness is here. I hope you filled out your brackets. That's what we're going to be focusing on a lot tomorrow, as well as any more breaking news that happens for the rest of the day and the beginning of the day tomorrow. Stick around, or we'll see you then. Thank you, everybody, so much for watching Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We'll be back same time, same place, here tomorrow. You guys have a great rest of your day. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like